Welcome everybody to episode 8 of Heavy Metal Tones. It's October, so what does that mean to us? It's Halloween month. So I think that this sort of time of year is very relevant to the music that we listen to here on the podcast and out in the world there. It's that time of month what time of year when people like to put up skeletons and lanterns and dress up and play trick or treat, more so in the Americas, and now in Europe. Here in Australia it's not as popular. A lot of dress up parties and you get the occasional trick or treat and a bit of cobwebs put here and there, but it's not as big as it is in America. So I always think you Americans do it very well. Anyway, what I thought we'd talk about is the relevance between the heavy metal music we listen to and its dark themes and the devil in music. I'm very interested in this particular aspect of it. I'll give you a background on myself. The reason why I like Halloween a lot is that for me it's not about putting up things and trick-or-treating. It never was. For me it's just about watching lots of horror movies. Now I watch a lot of horror movies anyway, but it's just an excuse to watch more for me. As a young boy, growing up in the 70s, my father was a big fan of horror movies and he loved being scared. And because I've got older brothers, much older than me, they weren't interested in sitting with Dad and watching the late night movie on a Wednesday night or a Tuesday night, either which one, I can't remember, it's too long ago now. But so I was a bit free range. I didn't have bedtimes really, and Dad would watch stuff with me that it wasn't inappropriate. He knew if it was inappropriate whether to watch it, but it was mainly just sort of camp 70s horror movies, mainly in the field of Hammer and the RKO black and white horror movies, and then your Universals like your Mummy and your Dracula and so on. And then if I was lucky, I'd get the Abbott and Costello meets the Mummy or Abbott and Costello meets the Wolfman and so on. So a bit funny as well. And from that sort of aspect grew my love of horrors, watching my dad cower. Honestly, really, he was such a coward, my father. He loved it. And because of that, my life changed quite dramatically. I was watching, I vividly remember it, was watching Hammer's Frankenstein with Christopher Lee. When the monster gets shot in the eye and that blood spurts out, the Kensington Gore, it was the first time in major cinema, probably in British cinema really, where blood had been shown on screen so viscerally. Yes, it was a bit pink, but it was still blood. And I remember when my dad, the sharp intake of breath, that, oh my God, the shock value. And I thought to myself, I wonder how they do that. I wonder how they make him look like the monster. And so I would spend all my time in the libraries getting books out on how to do it. I remember getting Dick Smith's his monster book, copying all of his stuff. I'd use household equipment to make wounds and scars. I learned to use gelatin, and my poor brother was he was very into it, so he loved being the experiment. Sort of the big game changer was when my brother and I watched American Werewolf in London and saw Rick Baker's werewolf transformations, and I just said to my brother then, that's it, I'm going to do that. And, I was very lucky. I went and studied. I went to art college and I went and studied special effects. I did mainly theatre, to be honest, in the UK for most of it. And then when I came to Australia, it was TV and theatre, but TV, film and theatre. And then I did that for, over 10 years. But the reason I gave up, sadly, was that the progress had taken over. The arse end of the business had fallen out, and instead of me spending, 5-6 hours or 8-9 hours sculpting, then, moulding and painting and applying for hours on end and being on set all the time, it was just about, we can do it with CGI. Now, great CGI like Gollum and Lord of the Rings, brilliant. But most the time when I kicked over and changed out, it was the bad CGI. If any of you have seen Lawnmower Man, it's a great movie, Lawnmower Man. So Stephen King novel, short story. It's a terrible, terrible movie. The CGI in it is so awful. And then there was a few, and they did remade cat people and they did CGI and they did all this sort of stuff. It's just really bad. And I just, I thought, well, I can't compete. So then I started doing other things. I was doing makeup, but I wasn't doing the special effects, and then I just got really bored and didn't want to do it anymore. And so changed track of life. But hey, these things happen. But it's still in my DNA, right? It's still my love of horror movies, and I think that horror shock aspect is what we're going to talk about today in most part. That's it. Where we're going to begin? We'll begin at the beginning. I think shock and awe in music, or the devil in music. People often say that, and it's famous that the devil has the best music. Of course he does. We know that. I mean, it would be if you are religious, you aspire to be in heaven, but you want to have fun with the devil, right? That's the key. Going right back, if you go back to the beginning of, while I was looking at it, when I was thinking about this podcast and thinking, what do I say? I thought about right back at the beginning of written music. When, even before written music, if you think, I believe that the ability to create music is spiritual. It's a spiritual thing. All art is spiritual, but music itself is more spiritual because you emote and you talk to more people with 5 bars of music than you would with a lifetime's worth of paintings. And so think about that. The people were right, like me. You imagine 400 years ago, when people were very illiterate, couldn't read or write. They looked at the church to save them and look after them and keep them safe in their spiritual and physical needs. And in that church, you've got people writing music, choral music, spiritual music, church music, and it's beautiful and uplifting and just clean and pure. And those people look on that and go, well, look at that. I'm looking at these people writing it. These must be people from God because they can make this wondrous noise that makes me happy. Then you think, then on the other side, there are people, then someone comes along and plays the, as I talked about before in other episodes, your tritones, your suspended sevenths, your augmented fifths, things that are a bit stark and angular and dark. Well, that must be the devil, mustn't it? Because why would they not keep making clean, pure, orchestral monk hymn music? Why is this dark stuff? But it must be satanic. And I think that's where it stems from. And then if you look at then sort of classical music, the likes of Wagner and Mahler, to some extent some Beethoven and some Mozart. Mozart's a leitmotifs, but he still has heavier music. These people were frowned upon, were shunned by communities and by their peers because they're making music that's heavy and dark. So we move forward and we think, okay, well, we've had the many phases of music. I mean, the classic story of oh God, see, I wrote the notes. I left them downstairs. I should record upstairs. I left them downstairs. Give me a moment. I'm going to have to my brain is gone. Sorry about that. Talk to you soon. See you, wait a minute. Back now, and I've got my teeth. That's good. I knew as soon as I left the bloody room, I knew what it was. Robert Johnson, when he apparently sold his soul at the crossroads to the devil to make himself famous and to be the best guitarist in the world. Just because he went away for 2 or 3 months and came back a better guitarist doesn't mean he sold his soul. It's a lovely story, though. He could have just played and be influenced and played every minute of the day to learn, Anyway, so from there on, okay, you've got this concept of the devil within music. And when we electrified music, when we then electrified music, that I think brought more to the table, because rock and roll is the devil's music. And I'm not going to say this as not Christian. I'm really non-denominational in my faith, really, and I don't care what you think or what your faith is. it's up to you. It all is good if it makes you happy. But the rock and roll is the devil's music. Why? Because it took people away from their scripture and from their learning and from their school. Because deep down in the soul, it grabs you by your very soul and it makes you want to move. I don't care who you are. Rock and roll, in its very core, its simple music structure, is exciting and inviting and makes you want to go and do things passionately and urgently. You don't put on rock and roll really, well, you could do, I suppose, but you don't sit down and go, yeah, just tap my toes. You do good rock and roll, you want to move around. And all music, essentially, that we listen to, that you're listening to, and you'll listen to after this podcast, and I will as well, is essentially rock and roll at its core. Whether it's heavy, slow, fast, dark, black, it's essentially rock and roll. And so where I'm going from, from that is to say is that when we electrify music, then I think really then the concept of the darker sides of music comes in, and we don't really get anything. I mean, apart from the moral aspect in America with Elvis and not showing his hips because he didn't want to enrage the hormones of young ladies. Or even then, the screaming at the Beatles and the raw passion of the Stones that the Beatles didn't have. They were more your clean cut, even though they did darker stuff. The Beatles were the dark ones. So it moves through there, right? You've got all these influences of rock and roll and and jazz again. I mean, jazz before blues. So the birth, if you look at the heritage of modern music, jazz, blues, rock and roll, and then everything on top of that. But jazz itself is also, it's another podcast. I think I could easily talk about this. This is also the darker side of music because it was non-structured. It's if you listen to good jazz, and I'm not talking about that really strange, weird stuff, and no one knows what they're doing kind of jazz, but jazz like Ella Fitzgerald jazz and stuff like that, where it's really, it's very unusual time signatures, and people are doing strange things with instruments that weren't done before, and because it was different, well, it must be the devil, it must be evil. I think that moves straight through into blues, and blues again was the same thing. They're playing these intricate guitar pieces, and it goes again also with blues. Hence the blues. It's not, hey, let's walk around in the field holding hands, poppies and sunshine and Jesus and the light. It's about their real life and about slave. Being enslaved and losing your love and being repressed. And again, that also, if I think about it as well, a lot of the gospel music, it's also influencing your jazz and your blues, or your slave, and I hate that word, sorry, but slave music from their, people who enslaved nations. They were using music to pull themselves out from their everyday sadness and life and look into the light. And I think that also sort of trickles down slightly into your jazz and your blues. So there's two sides to the coin. Anyway, I think I've gone way off point of where I was, but I quite enjoy that sort of thing. It's rambling. But as I was saying, so then you've got your blues, and then you've got your rock and roll, and then from your Beatles and your Stones and your Mersey beats and all this sort of stuff. Rock and roll music, I'm talking about the UK anyway, and in America, of course, you've got lots of other things. You've got your country and all sorts, but it's still your rock and roll. It wasn't until one band changed it all and really brought, from my mind, I've done some, I could be wrong, but one band changed it all for me, or for the world in general. I will mention that. I'm just going to go and get myself a cup of tea, so I'm going to stop that there. I will come back and we'll talk about what changed, which band changed the world, and what happened afterwards. Anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Just go and put the kettle on. Go and get yourself a cup of tea or a sandwich or dinner or beer or whatever you're doing, whatever time in the world it is. But I'm going to put my kettle on. I'll talk to you soon. Welcome back, guys. I've got my tea. I'm ready to go. Now, I wonder if you, while the break was there, where you're thinking, I wonder if I know what band it is. Of course, you'd all know what band it is. It's Black Sabbath. Formed in 1968 in Birmingham. This four-piece band of hippies and just crazy, wild-eyed youths of post-war youths were making originally blues music. They were in a band called Earth, and I have a friend of mine who saw them when they were called Earth. She is from Birmingham. She also saw Pink Floyd. She was there when they recorded Ummagumma, but hey, you know, I have that. I'm jealous at that point. But anyway, yes. So they released their first album, Black Sabbath, self-titled. Now, I'm just going to look at what year that was released. I should know that off the top of my head, being a big fan of the band, but you know, the brain. 1970, so 2 years after forming. And everyone thinks of Black Sabbath as a band that plays predominantly dark, satanic or black music, black metal kind of music. This is not the case. This is their first album. The only reason they recorded this album and called themselves Black Sabbath and wrote horror movie themes in their songs is that they wanted to be something different. There was the blues market was flooded in the UK. It was absolutely flooded. You know, Jethro Tull and they were just doing. There was so many blues bands, and they just wanted to be something different. Now they were big fans of Hammer horror movies. There was a cinema over the road from the recording where they were jamming. That was playing horror movies, and they thought, well, let's do something different. And of course, Tony, being the genius that Tony is on guitar, Tony Iommi, he's playing these intervals and you know, the devil's tones, tritones, and diminished fifths. And then with Ozzy coming out with that, you know, lamenting opening lines. And of course, Bill Ward with his intricate, deep bass drumming, and Geezer Geezer on bass is just unbelievable. He's just sitting there and rumbling away, and so I think that's where it starts. 1970. Of course, all their albums afterwards. If you look at their albums afterwards, and again, Paranoid, Master of Reality, Volume 4. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, maybe Sabotage, Techno Ecstasy, Never Say Die. All the ones with Ozzy, particularly. I keep hitting the mic. Sorry, guys. The very few songs on there are satanic based or dark based. It's really their first album. Same with Iron Maiden. For a long time, because Number of the Beast, they all thought they were Satanists. They couldn't be further from the truth, really. I mean, they might be. Who cares? I don't care if they are, but they couldn't be further from the truth, I don't think. And so it starts. And so we all know that really heavy metal starts at the birth of Black Sabbath. That they started it. There was heavy rock before, but these guys really sort of created the sound. And then other bands come along. After that, 10 years after, I think we see the very first. I mean, if you look at the cover of Black Sabbath's first album, with the lady in the field and the house behind it, if you took away the writing Black Sabbath and put Lindisfarne or Barclay James Harvest on there, you'd flick through that in a store in 1970 and go, oh, well, it's just another hippie album. It doesn't actually scare or jump out, or it has a bit of coldness to it, but it's not terrifying, you know? I mean, only 10 years previous to that, the Beatles had released that album, Never... Oh, the one with the babies on the front cover that they had to change, where they had babies with the dolls with bits of meat on them. You know, then that's a very rare cover. Then they recovered it with them just sitting there on the front. That's a dark cover, but it's not. But the music inside is nothing like what's on the front of the cover. And same with Sabbath. And so there's this image that they're this dark demonic band, and it followed them for, I think, forever. Really, I mean, they really like being. I mean, Ozzy hates the term heavy metal. I think he just doesn't like it. He just wants to be rock and roll. He's a rock and roll. He was a skinhead. Yeah, you know, he used to walk around the streets in caftans with a dummy around his neck. He did all sorts of weird things. So he wasn't really a heavy metal guy. I mean, he gets lumped in that, and you're great. He's made his life for it. But anyway, it was not till 10 years later. So 1980, we get the first real mainstream cover, even though it wasn't mainstream. It's a band called Witchfind. They're a band in the new wave of British heavy metal phenomena, my favourite subgenre of heavy metal. And their front, called Give 'Em Hell, the album is, and on the front cover it's got a crudely painted picture of Baphomet the devil. It's not scary by any means, but it's the first time that I think it came into our seeing. I've got that. It's an amazing album. Really good if you like just good old-fashioned rock and roll with a little bit of evil side to it. It's and then the year after comes the real daddy of them all, and that's Venom's Welcome to Hell. I've talked about this before, back in a few episodes back. But, you know, it's got the pentagram, it's got Baphomet, or the the goat of Mendes, as some people call it, on the front. It is absolutely terrifying. I found that particular cover, even to this day, I've got the patch on the back of my jacket from that cover, and when I first put it on, I couldn't look at it. And I'm not even Christian, and I'm not scared. It just had something seethingly evil about it. But that's when the music then reflects the image, because at the moment, up to that point, you know, it was all bluff and bluster. You know, pictures of the devil and stuff like that. Nothing really satanic. You know, and of course, then you have around that same period, you've got, as we talked about before, Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast, and on that album, only one song really has a satanic feel to it, and that is Number of the Beast. All right. Again, did they write that song for shock value? I don't think so. I think they just had a fucking good song they wanted to put out, and it happened to. I mean, I know that Steve Harris and Bruce Dickinson and the lads do read a bit of Dennis Wheatley, and they were reading that sort of stuff. So maybe, I mean, again, guys, if you don't know, I know it's Halloween month, and I've decided this is going to be a two-parter, so this is part one for the Halloween month episode. Do get yourselves round reading or watching Hammer's version of The Devil Rides Out by Dennis Wheatley. Honestly, brilliant. He knew Aleister Crowley, who was the once fated as the most evil man in the world. Who was the head of his own church, not satanic church, although he did dabble with Satanism, but I think he was more into older cults. I mean, let's face it, the devil on the planet is not as old as you think he is. There are much, much older faiths before Christianity, and so he dabbles with that, and that's another interesting story, but nothing music related. But you might enjoy that. Get into looking into him. Fascinating man. So we get into that. We're looking at the art now, and the art starts to become darker and more reflective, and bringing out that, you know, here's the devil in music. So originally, as I said before in part one, it's about the devil making the music, behind the music, why, being scared of what's not clean, floral, monastic music into a youth music, and giving and corrupting the morals of minors, with their heathen, hip shaking rock and roll. How dare these young boys? I mean, let's face it, the term teenager only arrives in the 50s. Up until then, you left school at 13 or younger, and you went to work. You didn't have, and then you're married and you raised a family. You didn't have a teenage years where you explored your life and your youth and your personality. It was given to you, and you just were taken, but that was it. And so not till the 50s, the post-war, do we get that. With On the Waterfront, with God, what's his name? The Godfather, with his white T-shirt on, and on a motorbike with the cigarettes rolled into his sleeve, and Elvis Presley and that whole rock and roll scene. So then we start really bringing that into music. And the music starts lyrically reflecting the big Mr. D, in its prose. And I could be wrong here, but I still think that Venom were the first, to really do that. Where you put on Welcome to Hell, every part of that album, every single song on that album has got something to do with the satanic sides, right? Every single one of it, even not directly referencing Satan or the devil, he's certainly in deep within the lyrical prose. So we then begin this movement of heavy metal with darker themes. Bands like Satan come out, and write albums, even called Satan, for God's sake. And again, a new wave of British heavy metal band. And then flowing from there, we have your thrash albums and your thrash bands, and your black metals and so on, up until the point where, but the reason it didn't, when Venom came out and released that album, it's such a game changer. Previously, when Sabbath released Black Sabbath, there was an outcry a bit about it, because we would come out from a war. We had the hippie 60s where everyone was love and peace, but everyone was scared of that as well, because no one likes change. And then you've got the Cold War, and then you've got all this economic problems, and they come out with this, and it was like, no, we don't like that. It's too much change. They weren't looking at that and going, they were looking from that side of it. Was when Venom arrives on the scene, we'd already been through 3 years of a punk revolution, with violence on the streets and race riots in Toxteth and in the East End of London. 3-day weeks where we had no electricity and power for the rest of the week, only 3 days, because men could only work 3 days because of labour strikes and coal strikes and coal miner strikes, and England itself was in a real state. I mean, I grew up in the 70s in London, and I remember the crap everywhere, shit in the streets, bags and rubbish not being collected. I remember sitting in my lounge room listening to the radio powered by a car battery, and we watched the TV. Not that there was any programs to watch powered by a car battery, because there was no electricity. And candles everywhere. I remember candles everywhere, and just being continually cold and in the dark. Anyway, we come through that, and so we sort of are jaded. So when this metal new form of music arrives, I don't think that the cognoscenti or the people were really that stressed by it, to be fair. You know, oh, we've had all that. We've had the shock of God Save the Queen and people looking like aliens. Basically, this isn't any different. And Venom will be honest. They'll admit that they're more punk than they are metal than they were. They really feel themselves as interviews I've seen with them, they consider them sort of more punk than heavy metal. They certainly didn't like the moniker of new wave of British heavy metal, they just didn't like that. It sort of boxed them in, I think. And really, you can't. They're a completely subgenre to it. I don't even think they're new wave of British heavy metal. They're just not. They're just like the Beatles weren't pop music towards the end. Like like the Pistols weren't really. They're punk, but they weren't really punk. Really, it was something completely different outside that genre, or the stereotype of that genre. Anyway, I'm rabbing on, but you know what I'm coming to on the next. So what I've talked about today, just recap. So we talked about how we perceive the darker side, the devil and black magic and evil in music, where it comes from. I said I think it comes from the fact that it's, you know, human beings look at music as a spiritual thing, even if you might not know that and don't think it is a spiritual thing. And therefore, if you do something different and darker and more stark, it must be driven by the devil. And then, of course, it moves from that into the lyrical aspect and the visual aspect of it, which is more obvious. You have an album called like Welcome to Hell, and you have a band like Satan, you know, Black Sabbath doing Black Sabbath. Of course, these things, you know, are going to be more obvious to the less educated people out there, or the people that are genuinely scared of change, and the church itself. The next episode next week is going to be about sort of 1980 onwards, and then we'll might recap a bit, because I might have forgot things. We're going to recap, go 1980 onwards. We'll do a bit of the Satanic Panic, which is very interesting, and then we'll look at where modern metal is in respect to the devil, the darkness, and all things around that. It is Halloween month, so I hope you're ready to have a good scare. If you're not into that kind of thing, that's fine. Be my guest. Look, this is just so interesting. Let me give you some homework for you. Do go and listen to Venom's Welcome to Hell if you haven't done it before. Listen to At War with Satan. Definitely listen to Witch Find. It's Witch Find with a YNDE, so Witch Find. Give 'em Hell. Do that, and you know, go back and listen to Sabbath's albums, and you would be surprised. Try and count how many really are satanic or black. Most of them are not. It's a perception, and unfortunately, it's a label they gave themselves. You know, I mean, it got returned back when Dio came in. There was a bit more of that sort of classic darkness, and then of course, when Tony Martin came in, it was more Nordic and stuff like that, a bit more black again, but not as dark. Yeah, do that. Give yourself a listen to those. You can get all that stuff on Spotify and YouTube. It's all available. And then when you come out the other side next week, we'll have a chat about the 1980 onwards. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'll see you and talk to you next week. And remember, not all the creaks behind you on the stairs are what they seem to be. Good night. Bye bye, guys.